Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! And a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Liverpool, lines it up, finds the net.
Great news, as Sunday's game proves to Arsenal fans all over the world that we can still care about football. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name's Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. Yeah, that's right. I mean, if nothing else, Sunday's game proved to me that I can still care deeply about football and specifically be devastated by it. And with all the losing and drawing and bad results and crappy stuff we've been through, I'd started to wonder if the game had the ability to move me. And it does. Yeah, it was quite heartbreaking. So I guess if you're looking for a silver lining, that would be it. We don't do a hell of a lot of winning anymore, and it's starting to get to be a worry, and we will get to that. There were positives from this game, which we will certainly draw out. There are some negatives from the game that will posit why they bubbled to the surface. And before I introduce everybody, let me just say that I hope you have great New Year's plans and a very happy New Year planned. We have a fun New Year planned for you, or New Year's Eve anyway, because if you'd like to spend it on your phone listening to a podcast, and I'm pretty sure that is in the top 2 or 3 ways to spend New Year's Eve, I will be joined by Tim Clark from Arse to Mouse to do a Arsenal Memories of the Decade pod for patrons. So if you've thought about signing up for Patreon, you want to do a stroll down memory lane, a decidedly probably doomy stroll, a stroll down doomy memory lane, not doomy, not like doomy, but like doom laden. Yuck. Anyway, that'll be up on Patreon tomorrow, so I'm excited for that. And obviously, we'll have the continuation of all these pods as the games come thick and fast. So we'll have a post-United pod after New Year's Day and all that. But I just wanted to let you know that that is coming. So if you're interested in that, you can do that. We are going to announce the winners of all of our giveaways on the post-United pod. So that's coming up. And as always, if you do want to sign up for The Athletic, there is still time this year to save on next year and get the whole year half off and a month free by going to theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision. And of course, Clive did win, quote unquote, the holiday singing competition. You voted him the person you'd most like to hear sing, which I'm sure you only voted for because he is your favorite podcast member and not because you most want to hear him sing. But I do have the recording, and I am excited to share it with you. It is not ready yet. It will be coming out soon, but that recording is done, and you can look for it very shortly. So with that having been said, Paul's on Twitter, Pause in My Pants. Hello, Pause.
Woohoo!
Clive's on Twitter, ClivePAFC. Hello, Clive.
Hello, hello.
Tim's on Twitter, Stoberto. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Plans for a Scott podcast have been in the works, as I mentioned, and they will be coming soon, as will Clive's transfer pods for patrons. Anyway, so let's start here. Paul, I think that the only way you can talk about this game intelligently is with another panel of people. But another way that you can talk about this game intelligently is to divide it into the segments where we were sort of dominant and where we sort of weren't. And they align pretty closely with when Chelsea went with the back three at the start of the game and when they brought Jorginho on and switched to the back four. And I think it's interesting because there's some people saying that Arteta got out-coached, out-tacticked here. I don't know that I agree, and we'll come on to that later. But if you're going to make that argument, then you certainly have to say that Lampard got it wrong from the start with their back three. But right from the beginning, looking at this lineup, were you sort of surprised at some of the selections? I think Guendouzi coming in excited me, although as we'll come to, that maybe was misplaced excitement, and happy to see Chambers come on, but once again, we lose a center back to injury. But it's that front three, sticking with Lacazette in his poor form and sticking with Nelson. Curious what you thought about that, and then how you felt at the beginning of the game as they got going.
Yeah, so as we chatted before this, I may be totally out of step with the planet on this. I did watch it a second time, and it does tend to create a separation in your views. I thought that Lacazette's finishing is off. There's no denying that. He's hesitant in front of goal. But I actually thought he was a very important piece of our overall play. I think the front three worked really well. Nelson and Maitland-Niles was a great pairing. Torreira was on their side and forming triangles with them. That was really nice. Ozil was popping onto that right side with them to join the dots. Lacazette was working both sides. Aubameyang and Saka throughout the game was a great pairing. In the first 30 minutes, I mean, so there's the Guendouzi conversation, and I don't think you should criticize anybody in the first 30 minutes for any performance because it all worked, and that's what you take out of it, the system. We'll talk about the later part of it, but I think I'd like to have a go at Guendouzi for the later part because I thought he was actually very good, very busy, and did his job throughout. So Torreira and Guendouzi were a very balanced pairing, I thought, in midfield, and they dominated. And people like I've seen the outcoached comment a few times on Arteta, but he outset up Lampard here, and he kind of guessed what was coming after the Spurs game. He got a spot on. We totally outplayed them. With the ball and without the ball, the shape of this team for certainly the first 45 was immaculate. Absolutely. I haven't seen anything like that under Wenger or under Emery at any point in terms of a unit. It was like a ball of players moving cohesively. And, even after the 30 minutes as they started to play, they couldn't really get at us. It was all around the edges of it. The cohesion in that unit in the first 45 minutes was superb. And I think even in the early stages of the second half. So I think I have no issues with the setup. Obviously, we lost Chambers, which it was and is a big blow. But in terms of the personnel, I think it fully justified itself for the first 30. And I would say even for the first, 70, 80 minutes of the game.
Yeah, I have to say, like, the back three just did not work for them at all. And part of it is because I think we attacked it in the spaces that you have to, which is sort of the wings that are vacated by the wing backs. We had a lot of joy down those flanks, and especially Nelson's side. And then they couldn't get out. The way we had our structure, and I agree with you, Paul, I think we just had a beautiful disciplined structure off the ball that made it very, very difficult for them to play out. And I think when you're using a back three, your center backs have to start the ball progression, right? Like that, they have a lot of responsibility for building the play when they recover the ball. And Chelsea just could not play out for that first 30 minutes. And you look at their pass map, and there's a lot of passing, laterally back and forth between center backs in their defensive third. It looks like a sort of Emery pass map for the first 30 minutes. 86 completed passes of 112 attempted, and almost all of them right across the sort of defensive third or the edge of their defensive third between center backs. So I thought we had that.
Our pressing to the touchline was excellent, and that involved everybody. And the centre backs pushing up high to keep it tight. I mean, it was a 10-man press in effect, even if all 10 men weren't chasing the ball. There were no gaps, and it was a thing of beauty. Just watching that unit moving across and back across that pitch for the first 45 minutes, for all the talk of things changed on 30 minutes, I thought it was exemplary and just as encouraging what we did in that period after they made their switch to the back four. I mean, it would have been great to mince them for another, 15, 45 minutes, but I just don't think it's feasible. Given what he came into in terms of personnel, fitness, etc., I think it was incredibly heartening what we did once they made their change. It was just so tight. I haven't seen us play like this.
Yeah, I agree that certainly in that first period, that first phase before he made the switch, it was very encouraging. And Tim, I think one of the things that was particularly encouraging was the play of Nelson. This is a player who, for me, has not necessarily been the star of the academy kids coming through. And he's the one that I think had a lot of hype when he came back from his loan spell in Germany. And Saka maybe passed him. At one point, Willock had passed him, although I think Willock is a player that we may have to touch on later as one who is maybe taking a step back over the past few months, which can happen in youth development. You'd have to say Martinelli coming in as a player that has certainly passed him, although not an academy kid. But this was a good game for Nelson, and he really effectively used his pace and his guile down the right wing. And I think, once again, it was just some of the final ball, both from him and certainly with Lacazette, that was wanting. But in terms of Nelson's contribution early in this game, was that some of the best football you've seen him play, for the first team, at least in recent memory?
Yeah, I think so. Although I've not been quite at. It's a bit weird because I wasn't as high on him during the summer, for some reason. Because I didn't really see a lot of him at Hoffenheim, but I thought, this is all based on like a little 7 to 8 game spurt he had, and that's generally quite dangerous territory. But actually, I've liked what I've seen from Nelson this year. I think you're right. He's actually he's actually probably the opposite to what a lot of people would have thought, just seeing like tweets from the Hoffenheim account about a year ago. I don't think he's a high end product kind of player, but what I do like about him, what I have always liked about him, is I think he is like someone who's like tactically very adept, who's very good at following instruction. I was really impressed with him when he started at Newcastle on the first day of the season, because he was doing that like one of the few things we could really dig out from the whole Emery ball and what the hell is it, is that he likes his wide players to become inside forwards effectively. And what he kept doing in that game again and again was just stepping inside and allowing the fullback to overlap him. And he's been doing that to a degree in the last 2 games as well, and just letting Ozil have, the space outside of him. And I think what's really shown in these couple of games as well, you can tell when you've got quite a tactically intelligent player by what they like, how they gel or how they mesh with the people around them. And I saw really good link up with Maitland-Niles, particularly because Maitland-Niles was, it wasn't a straightforward fullback right winger partnership. You've got Maitland-Niles moving in field to create a 3 in midfield. You've got Nelson moving in field, sometimes to let Ozil go outside of him. It's not straightforward stuff, but he was doing it, and it's the same thing that impressed me probably in that Newcastle game, where I thought, yeah, you're one of the people who has got what the manager has asked for, and you're doing it, and you're doing it to quite a high level. And that is honestly what I've seen from him, I think, this season. I think people have been underwhelmed because he hasn't had a lot of goals and assists, and his end product definitely needs work. We've definitely seen that in the last 2 games as well. But I've kind of taken to, I think he can be basically, so like from where I was sitting at this game, I got a much better look because of my seat in the upper tier at the lines in the team, and they were so much cleaner. You just had like 4 straight line across the back. Off the ball, that is. On the ball, obviously, Maitland-Niles moves in. Then you had Guendouzi and Torreira kind of parallel to one another. And then you had the front 4 in a straight line as well. And actually, I think if we persist with this front 4, Nelson's kind of lack of end product shouldn't be such a problem, because he can be that structurally intelligent player. Because really you'd expect Ozil, Aubameyang and Lacazette, they're the ones you want putting up numbers, they're the ones you want hitting the back of the net, creating goals. And don't get me wrong, you want Nelson to do that as well, but it's not as big a problem, I think, if he's in a front 4 with those 3. And what he was very good at doing was just holding that line off the ball, so that when Chelsea or Bournemouth were trying to play out, there were just 4 players straight away kind of trying to pen them in. And he seems to have the intelligence off the ball to give that space to Maitland-Niles and to give that space to Ozil. So I've actually been quite enthused by him tactically. I know that's a really wanky thing to say, and that's something usually people say about players that are a bit crap when they're just trying to defend them. But actually, I think that Arteta will be looking at him at the moment and thinking, yeah, this is a guy I can work with, and this is a guy I can perhaps mould as well, and one of the guys who, a bit like Maitland-Niles as well, has responded to him really well so far. And
maybe, Tim, using him for an hour of willingness to run and press, yep. Because Giant Gunnar highlighted this on the Discord in his stats review of the Bournemouth game. Reiss Nelson had the most pressure events of any player in the team, and in a game where we pressed a lot, he was the most pressy presser. And once again, I thought really good off the ball, positionally disciplined, working hard for the team off the ball to press. And, you might say there's a lot of things that I think Pepe can give us, but working like mad, running his socks off to press for an hour isn't it. So I'm going to use an hour of Nelson's legs to run him into the ground pressing, and then I've got Pepe to come off and, beat tired legs and get in the box and create scoring chances and things like that.
Yeah, and that's and in many respects that's usually easier to do with younger players, because A, they have the energy, and B, they want to kill to get in that team.
They don't have the ego. And, yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm not so like Ozil's been working really hard. They all have. They've all been working hard. Lacazette's been working really hard. Aubameyang too. But in some respects, it's easier to say to the kid that's trying to make a mark, run your absolute balls off today, and you've got the least glamorous role in the front four, but if you want to play, that's what you're going to do.
Yep.
And
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So Clive, before we sort of start to talk about how the game transitioned and things like that, we absolutely have to call out Ozil and Torreira again. And this is consecutive games now where I think during our period of dominance and where we looked really in control of the game, they were stars. Once again, I thought the two clear stars of that early period. I would love it if you could touch on both. I think they are both thriving in the structure that Arteta has created. Torreira with smaller space to work in, and certainly the back three that Chelsea picked helped him because, as we'll talk about later on, the space he had to cover got bigger, the number of players he had to keep an eye on got bigger, and he was bypassed a little more easily. He had a small space to operate in and did it brilliantly in this game and carried the ball forward when he needed to sort of start the attack. Ozil, once again, thanks to the work of the three ahead of him, picking spaces between the lines, bursting away, picking final balls, really looking like a vintage Mesut Ozil. Now, a vintage Mesut Ozil who looks now like he can maybe only go about an hour, but that's better than what we thought we had. So how impressed were you again, certainly early in the game, with their performances, and did you see them as the stars of that period as well?
There's lots of stars, but I think it's all about the byproduct of the distances that we're playing in. And you sort of half said it there, small spaces, and it's obvious to everybody, particular keen listeners of the podcast, Arsenal are a small space team. Just by the way they're built athletically, the type of players that they have, the lack of sprinters that they have. And listen to Tim say, things like, Tim and Paul talk about who suits Arteta's system. Forget Arteta's system. Who suits a modern pressing game? The best athletes suit the modern pressing game, and some of the best athletes we have are the younger players at Arsenal. Saka, Maitland, Niles, Willock, and Nelson. And funny enough, they're all doing quite well in the new system per se. But what we're really doing is we're playing modern top-class football, and it requires a different type of player, a different type of athlete with different attributes. And it's becoming quite clear that this way of playing suits some players better for longer periods. Obviously, Torreira being one of those real chunky sprinters that's really got a real sharp 5 to 10 yards max. When you get 15, 20, he starts to tread water. And we saw that many times in the big space Emery Arsenal towards the end, where we had 3 different units, one dropping off, and we saw that late in the game. I won't touch it until later, Elliot, but one dropping off. And when you drop off like that, guess what? It's a big space game when we look very vulnerable. In the small spaces, Torreira is a bank robber. He steals money out of your pockets without you even knowing. And Ozil has got the touch in a small space. You give him the ball in the small space and he tidies up. He fixes problems. He creates the next pass. And that's exactly what team don't want. So when you see him get the ball in a small space and he just flows around the corner and he keeps the ball, and then you're straight onto that back three, then you think, okay, well, I better drop away again. Till he gets more space. You see what I mean? He gets another yard because he's now created extra yards by his soft, nice touch in the early phase of the game. And now he's rocking and rolling, and now he feels part of it because obviously Arteta is saying play to him, build up through him, and then we go the next phase post him. He moves it outside and we go again. So it does look really, really nice. I agree with everything everyone said about the distances, and the distances from front to back are allowing certain people to shine, and Ozil and Torreira are one of them. And it was a simple coaching thing to be more engaging and more front-footed, but the difference is massive. Now we need to talk about how long we can sustain that, right? And I'm sure you're going to touch on it, so I don't want to take it from you, but how long we can sustain that level of cohesiveness as a unit, moving together. When the left winger moves in, the right back moves out, keeping our distances consistent. And what that actually does, it exposes the weakest in the chain. And the ones that drop away, because you're now saying to everybody, you have to be at the same fitness levels because we're working as a unit. As soon as that chain breaks down, then the distances start to grow. And then that's towards the last 15 minutes, that's when the game sort of changed. But let's focus on the period you highlighted earlier. And I do think small space team Arsenal, let's play with a small space while we have this player with us.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the other thing that has to be considered here too is, look, this is a team that has been really bad this season and really bad for most of last season. And like getting them to be good for 90 minutes against good opposition right away is not an expectation we can have, but seeing periods of play where they look like a competent team, and I realize we're lowering the bar dramatically, and you might even say, would you have lowered the bar this way for Emery? And that's maybe a conversation for another time. But I do think that the plan that we started the match with was one that was working, that looked like good football, that emphasized, the strengths of the team. And I think we just have to, call out one player in particular who I think deserves attention before we move on to how the changes impacted the game. And Paul, I think, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang has started to divide opinion because of, what his brother posted on Instagram and some of the social media behavior. And he's not everyone's cup of tea because when he's not scoring, he's not always super involved. And yet, he looks as committed to this project as anybody. He ran his ass off this whole game. He worked as hard defensively in his own third as I've ever seen him work in the attacking third. He scores the goal in typical Aubameyang fashion, just, right place, right time. You could even say that's a training ground move. It looked like they were sort of celebrating it like they had planned it. Not being selfish, the layoff he gives to Lacazette, where Lacazette doesn't control it well and fluffs his shot. I mean, that should be 2-0 and totally changes the game. I mean, more obvious thing has never been said, but you get my point. I realize I have been an Aubameyang stan, and sometimes when you're on record as really loving a certain player, your analysis of that player can get thrown out as just being influenced by bias. So I will ask you, were you as impressed with both his quality and his commitment on this day? And for you, was this the performance of a true captain?
Yeah. So I thought what he put out on that field was astounding. He walks off at halftime with Saka's got his arm around him because they're that left side pairing, and the two of them are talking about how the game's going, how they're working together, and you see it. Saka picks up that knock later on. I think it's like a dead leg or something, where he's basically limping for the last 20 minutes, and Aubameyang just picks up the slack all through that period. But throughout the game, he's chasing back right to our penalty box, right to the byline, making runs deeper than anybody else. It's a astounding level of commitment, given what our fears were for a senior player. I mean, look at all of the senior players that Freddie was struggling so much with, and this isn't a knock on Freddie. We all know he was in an impossible situation, given no backing, no staff. But who were those senior players who weren't putting it out for Freddie? Ozil, Lacazette on the bench. Aubameyang played throughout for Freddie, and I think was putting in a shift, but not like this. I mean, they have whatever happens in the future in this particular game, they put it all out there for each other, and I think that level of commitment was it jumped off the page. He never slacked right through the second half when we began to tire. Aubameyang did his stuff the whole way through. I think he was. This is one game he can hold his head up high on as a captain. I think it's really interesting as well. We'll talk about defenders and Luis and stuff, who I think again mostly had a very good game, and it didn't really suit him, as Clive's often pointed out. He's not a player who likes a high line, but I think he generally did really well with it in this setup. But when you look at the captain's talk, if you want to call it that, at the start, where they huddle in a circle, it's Luis who does that talk. And against Chelsea, of course, there's a whole other backstory here. But it's clear that they've worked out what leadership means within this team with those guys, and they're really pitching in. And you hear the comments from those guys and a couple of the younger guys about Arteta. Obviously, they're going to say nice stuff, but when you read between the lines, it really looks like they get why they're doing it, and they just want to enjoy their football. They know the season's gone, in large part. We're kind of shot in that sense, but they want to play. The alternative is an ugly, dirty season of bad football, getting rollocked after every performance, which unfortunately maybe they still get a bit of that after this result. But the performance is just phenomenal from Aubameyang, and he's playing from the left and yet still making and getting his chances. If Lacazette could kick in with some sharpness, we'd really see the fruits of that relationship. I think there's a lot to be said that was good about what Lacazette did, but he's finishing like a guy who didn't have much of a post preseason fitness and availability. So in the end, Aubameyang doesn't get the credit for what he did in this game because we didn't get the result.
Yeah, and I mean, we love to quote things like XG and shot stats and stuff like that, but like if Lacazette was getting his shot off more, we'd have more shots and more XG. I mean, a lot of moves died at the feet of Lacazette, just not sorting his feet out in time. I don't think we need to go into Lacazette, and the only reason I don't think so is we've really covered it. He's busy, he's involved, the quality isn't there right now. You could say it's confidence. You could say it's just who he is. I think he has always had the limitation since he's come to Arsenal that it takes him that half second longer to get a shot off than you'd like. And the difference is in the past, he was scoring from positions where few people score because he's such a great finisher. Now he's just not getting the shots off, so he's not finishing. The layoff where Aubameyang...
He's lacking power, Elliot.
Yeah.
His lower body power is gone. He's obviously not... He must be carrying injury. He's not training as much. He doesn't look as powerful as he used to look. He's not holding people off.
Tim touched on that, by the way. Wasn't it just the last pod, Tim, where you were saying basically that when a player misses a preseason due to injury, you've never seen them sort of recover their season fully?
Yes, he did.
Yes, he did.
And the worrying thing is, if I can jump on that, it kind of chills me to my bone when Tim said that, because you'd be inclined to say, well, he's only had 2 games in a row, and like he'll improve his level and he'll get his sharpness and confidence, which is the way you'd like to lean on it, but it may not be. This might be his ceiling for most of the season, which is the scary thing. But if he can get sharper,
he'll score the odd screamer because he just has it in his locker. But if he's not going to get his shot off, and if he's going to need that extra beat, sorry, Clive, I cut across you. So why don't you finish your thought on his lack of power? I was just referencing that it ties into something Tim had been saying last pod, which I think was a really astute observation, in that maybe he just has never quite gotten his fitness level this season to where it needed to be.
I think it's maybe more of a signpost that he's carrying an injury and he's not able to train at the levels he needs to train at to get to levels that we've seen him previously. This looked very reminiscent of his first season when he had that. I think it was a knee injury around Christmas time of his first season. He delayed his operation, had his operation, came back, and he started to fly. And just before he did take the operation, I had similar feelings about him then. I worried about him. Spurs fan called him Alex Lacazette. That's their nickname for him. And I'm thinking, oh, that's not good. But he came back and he started firing. He looks underpowered. You can tell when he's running for the ball, his legs collapse. Everything in his body is not coordinated. He's not carrying his natural power that he has. And a big part of his game is his power shooting off both feet. If we're not getting that, then you ask yourself, is he posting up like Giroud? Is he connecting the play? On occasion, yes. But we're lacking the power in those boots, and we need to get that back as quickly as possible, because he's looking the weakest of our front set at the moment. Well,
and it's difficult, right? Because, I mean, there are reasons that you pick him, because, it's easy to just say, well, then you got to drop him and put Aubameyang up front. Well, then who's on the wing? Will that player work for the team the way that Aubameyang has been? I mean, you can't move Saka there because you need him at fullback. So now you're talking about Pepe, but Pepe's not a left-sided forward. So do you put him on the right and Nelson on the left? Probably not. Martinelli's injured. He doesn't have a lot of choices. There was a lot of focus, and we'll come on to the substitutions, about Arteta getting out-coached and the substitution patterns. I mean, second game in a row where he's lost a central defender due to injury early, lost that sub, plus he's got injuries and fitness issues and limitations in the squad. Like, I don't know what you expect him to do with 2 subs and no players, but we'll come on to that. Tim, if the stars were maybe Ozil and Torreira in that early part of the game, unfortunately, I think at the point when we were playing well, the player who was not playing well was Guendouzi. I have worshipped at the Church of Guendouzi since he's arrived, as everybody knows. I still believe in his ceiling and who he is as a player. And development is not linear. But this is certainly a worrying stage in his development, especially when we get a coach who finally seems to have us playing a sort of comprehensible style of football that you would think would suit him in a position that's natural to him, he was outperformed by his youthful peers in positions that aren't necessarily best suited to them. I thought this was a game that unfortunately kind of vindicates the criticism that people who don't believe in him have had. And it's a worry because if Xhaka is definitely going, one of the reasons you let him go, I mean, obviously you have to buy a midfielder, you'd think, but is because you trust Guendouzi to play 2,000, 2,500 minutes in the Premier League at a high level. And this is the first time I just looked at it and said, I maybe have concerns about this player. And that's coming from, a true Guendouzi believer. So were you as concerned by this performance from him, and where do you sort of stand on how his development is going right now?
Yeah, so I thought it was a bad performance. I think everyone can see that. I'm not massively concerned, to be honest, just because he's 20. This happens. And we've probably seen why he's been sat down for the last few weeks, and in fact, probably even prior to that, when Ljungberg came in and Ljungberg made the call really not to play him, I think we could kind of see why. And that's kind of fine. Like, that happens to most 20-year-old, other than the absolute freaks. That happens to most 20-year-old players, and it's fine. If he's still in this kind of rut in like 6 months or a year's time, then yeah, it's really time to worry, and it's time to think, wow, have we overhyped this player? Like, your impression of his ceiling, for my money, is still absolutely bang on. That's not to say he's going to find that ceiling. Lots and lots of young players with huge potential don't, and we've had a lot of them at the club over the last decade or so. Players that people regard as a joke now, who are not, in terms of their talent, are not jokes. I know how Denilson was considered before he came to Arsenal, and things just didn't work out for him for a number of reasons. That just happens. So at the moment, I'm not hugely concerned, and I wrote something about this today, actually, in reference to Lacazette as much as anything. Like, sometimes players just do lose form. In fact, most players lose, like, other than the absolute elite, players lose form. Even the best players lose form. And that, again, can be for like a multitude of reasons, physical, mental, on the pitch, off the pitch.
We just talked about Lacazette, right? he's
exactly.
Struggling for you.
But, yeah, exactly. But one of the things we start to do as fans is we start to relitigate what we think their talent is, and we start to go, oh, maybe he's absolute shit. And maybe all those times I said he was the dog's bollocks were complete rubbish. And actually, I know this is a really boring answer, but it's usually somewhere between the two. Like I say, I think yours, and I don't just say yours, it's my impression of his ceiling as well, is I think this kid can go right to the top. I really, really do think he can. And I think the psychological signs are really, really great. He needs to learn to do a little bit less, but that's fine. I think that's a much better sign to have as a young player than the opposite. For example, it used to happen to Van Persie. Van Persie was like, I remember when we had him when he was 21, 22, he was trying to do everything all the time. And, that just comes with a little bit of time and a little bit of coaching. And I think now we do actually have a good coach that, like, I get the impression that Emery loved him so much. It was just like, yes, keep going out and try to do everything all at once.
Well, because someone had to.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas I do have like some level of trust that Arteta will perhaps coach a little bit of moderation into him, which is fine. It's all part of the learning process. I'm not really concerned at all, but at the same time, like, I recognise that a lot of the time talent and potential isn't realised, and I still don't know if he will realise all of his, but I am not at all ready to reassess what I think his talent level is and how far I think he can go. I think this was completely to be expected, to be honest. He's come from Ligue 2 as a 19-year-old, and really probably none of us when we signed him expected to even see him like on the bench until about now. Like, most of us when we signed him probably thought, yeah, he'll play a bit of Europa League, a bit of Carabao Cup. Maybe in his second season he'll start sneaking onto the bench, as the 6th or 7th sub. And that obviously the fact that he didn't do that creates a different level of expectation. But I still think he's an absolutely super talent. He's not playing well at the moment. That's fine. That wouldn't concern me for a good few months yet.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you something. I think the problem is that he is compared with Granit Xhaka. And so you have these battle lines drawn. And I think he's a very, very different player from Xhaka. And I actually think Xhaka is a more traditional deep-lying playmaker who likes the game out in front of him and is better when he's a little deeper and can survey the pitch and see what's ahead of him. And I think Guendouzi, and I've had this suspicion for a while, is a little bit better when he's a little higher up the pitch. His interceptions are better. His breaking up a play is better. He has a better eye for when to jump a pass. I think he can play the final ball. He has that kind of floated over the top ball. He can play the through ball. He can play a little short pass, and he can duck around a defender. I see him as a left 8. I don't know if you agree, Clive, but that to me is what I see. Whereas Xhaka, you want him, sort of in your half, making that intermediate value pass. I think you want Guendouzi 5 yards for into the opposition half. Do you sort of agree that and again, I don't want to make this a Guendouzi versus Xhaka pod or just a Guendouzi pod because there's a lot more to get to. Let me give you 1 minute quickly on Guendouzi because then I want to shift gears into another period of the match.
Yeah, Tim called it actually about when he said about reducing his role slightly.
I think I called it when I said he's a left-sided 8, personally. But then.
Yeah, he's a left 8. That's what he is. Eventually,
don't just repeat what I'm saying, Clive. Come
on. When we do go to 4-3-3, he will be the left 8, and that suits him. He drifts that way, and he likes to come on his right foot and sweep play passes that way, seeing the pitch from the side. That's what he is. A lot of what he did basically was. Reminded me a little bit of a young Aaron Ramsey when I used to criticise him a lot more. I felt he used to try to do too much and was never where I wanted him to be. Right? So, and I wanted a coach to reduce his space that he worked in. That's exactly the same feelings I have with Guendouzi right now. But I think Emery wanted him to do everything, like you alluded to. And so now he felt very empowered going wherever he liked. But the price was a team with nothing in the middle of the pitch. And that doesn't work. It's quite interesting. I think he was overplayed. Didn't play. Come out. Come back in. We're waiting for the superstar to reappear. And he still looks a bit leggy to me. Looks very leggy. So I think we have to just fight through this, or I'd like to see him out a little bit longer. But we're not exactly star-studded on the bench, are we? So I think we're going to have to play him through this.
Yeah, and so let's shift gears to after the change they made. And I have a take that you will not believe about this game, which is that it wasn't as bad as people think, and I will come to that. But they do make a change that changed the flow of the game, if not the dominance of the game. I think that there's this perception that once they made the change, we just got dominated. They took over control of the game on the ball, but created very little. I think it is worth noting that until the hour mark, we were still out shooting them. Now, we were out shooting them 5-4, but out shooting them. Until Leno's howler, we were ahead of them on XG. They had created next to nothing. I mean, half a goal, not even half a goal of XG until Leno's howler. And I'm not beating up on Leno. It is a howler. It's his first of the season. I think he's been phenomenal for us, a real revelation. And goalkeepers make mistakes, and he picked the absolute worst time to do it. And if he doesn't do it, I think we win the game. But so the perception that we were being dominated, while fair in terms of our time on the ball, I think is a little unfair in that when you have a lead and the other team is struggling to create anything against you, I think you're doing okay, especially when you're a team flagging in confidence, flagging in fitness and physicality, and you're trying to get through to a win against a rival that can revitalize your season off of basically having no confidence in yourself. So I think we have overplayed the extent to which the game was taken away from us by that change. Maybe the ball was taken away from us, but, you still have to create something, and Chelsea did not. So, Clive, in terms of the patterns of play, though, what did the change to the back four, the introduction to Jorginho, do in terms of patterns of play, and why do you think we struggled to respond to it?
So immediately, what Chelsea did with Zuma, Rudiger, and Tomori at the back, they're three monster defenders, killers off the ball, right? So Spurs gave them the ball early, they'd win it, one-on-one, didn't mind going one-on-one, and then give it to their ball progressors in Willian and I think Mount on the day. Fantastic game plan for Spurs. Against Arsenal, we didn't give them the ball. We brought it to them. went behind their midfield and really stressed them. And then when they had the ball, we then said to them, what can you do to progress the ball? And then we put them under pressure, and they're not good on the ball. And guess what? We got it back. This is smart from Lampard, right? So what he did then, he said, okay, I've got no ball progression. Take off Emerson, who got rinsed for the goal, and then basically puts on Jorginho. Now we've got ball progression. So they start to pass a bit more. Eventually that wears on us mentally. We drop off slightly. He's looking at Tomori, right back, going to be a fantastic player, that boy. Right back, he's not good at progressing the ball. They need somebody to bring on to progress the ball in the wide areas, just to make sure Aubameyang is stressed a bit more and has to think about his defensive duties late into the game. By doing that, they take him away from where we want him to the box. They bring on the young kid, I can't remember his name, but he was decent, pretty sharp, right? So
Lamptey, yeah,
Lamptey, okay. And I have heard about him, but I've never seen him. But to come on as a Chelsea youth player without to be that slightly unknown compared to the ones we all know about, and do that, well, fair play to you, right? So he strode into the wide spaces and kept Aubameyang honest. And suddenly now Chelsea have ability to go up the pitch. And that's what's changed. Now that stresses us. So that stresses our unit. That stresses our compactness. But what it really stresses, lads, is our mental fragility. We haven't won many football matches, and we started to play the finishing line, and we started to hold the game. And the natural tendency was, okay, they're progressing. I'm feeling it. We're okay. We think we can handle them. We think we can handle them. Let's drop in and do it by spaces around the box and drop away. And so you can say it's a form of control without controlling the game. But I'm sort of with you. Although I was incredibly stressed. And when Leno came for that, I sort of understood it, because our defence needed him to come for that ball. We were stressed. Our forwards coming back, making tackles and fouls. We felt the stress of them coming on to us. And when the goalkeeper takes a cross, you think that's just what his defenders needed. I felt Leno was trying to help people out. I think he's been much more front-footed since Arteta has arrived, and he just got it wrong. I think that was all a byproduct of better ball progression, more passes. Chelsea's passing numbers were much better than ours by the end of the game. They had 120, 130 more passes than we did. And that has a wearing effect on us. What I would have done, potentially, I would have just took Ozil away from the front line a little bit more and dropped him right in and just create a 3 in there, a tighter 3, rather than play with a 10. I'd have gone to a 3 and I'd have gone that way. And I said, right, I've got to make sure I cut off passing lanes to stop the progression, to stop the entry passes into forwards. That's what I would have done late in the game. But again, if the bench options were there, it becomes a more obvious substitution. He's looking at Willock, he's looking at Smith Rowe, who had a bad outing last time. So he does like for like with Willock and Ozil. And I think maybe he's bringing Willock on, yes, but playing him as an 8, not as a 10. But Willock sticks in the bottom corner. We all think what a genius move that was. So fine margins, but I felt ball progression for Chelsea improved. Could we have reacted? Only maybe with a slight tweak of Willock's role late in the game when Ozil ran out of legs. But apart from that, I don't think we could do much more than what we actually did.
Yeah, look, I don't think anyone's going to accuse me of being a Pollyanna. That's not my brand. But through an hour of this game, they had 4 shots. Their XG, their expected goals, were 0.14. Okay? They had done nothing. Even by 75 minutes, they were on 7 shots, and their XG was 0.33. They then had 2 good chances. They had the Tammy Abraham header that he missed, and then the goal is a tap-in, and they basically equaled the entire XG they had to that point in the game with the tap-in goal from Jorginho, okay? But prior to that, they're doing nothing. Really next to nothing. And
Elliot, can I add one thing?
Please.
Think of all the yellow cards and fouls they had to commit to stop us on the counter that the ref let them get away with.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you about this, yeah.
So that doesn't show up in the stats, right? For Lacazette was stopped 2-3 times in really promising countering territory, and yet that didn't show up as anything but a free kick to us. So, I mean, that's the way the game's played these days, but the referee had a huge role in that period where we were out of possession, keeping our shape, recovering the ball, and then the promising chances we did have, they snuffed out, versus what we did when they had a counter and got the second goal.
Yeah, I mean, here's why I think it is such a tough situation for Arteta. Think of all the things at play. You've had one enforced substitution, okay? So already you've only got 2 subs that you can use. You don't have a lot on the bench to call from, oh, by the way, right? I mean, you're not sitting on a loaded bench of experienced players to come in and kill off a game. You have basically no one in midfield, like no one. Joe Willock, and a Joe Willock who I think has been bad and maybe needs a spell out of the team. But if he's out of the team, who the hell do you even use? He's got no one to call on. All right. Now, think about it from Arteta's standpoint. You have a lead. You don't have a lot of the ball, but they're creating nothing. They're not hurting you. And Wise after the fact, a lot of people are saying, oh, I should have brought, and I said this at Wise after the fact, oh, we should have brought on Pepe probably for Lacazette or something. But like, do you trust Pepe to do the defensive work? They're not hurting you. They had 4 shots through an hour, 6 shots through 70 minutes. They've created nothing. You don't look like you're in trouble. I mean, I had the fuck yes tweet in drafts ready to go right before Leno's howler, because I was like, we're just seeing this out. It was a reasonably professional defensive effort. Mustafi, to his credit, heading a lot of balls away, doing a really nice job in the air. Luiz, I thought, showing that maybe after all this won't wind up being a calamitous transfer, because I think he's been good in these last 2 games and was really good again in this game. Really, really good, to be fair. And so it's tough for Arteta. You got another game on New Year's Day against United. You've got a tired squad. You have not much on the bench. You only have 2 subs available, and they're not hurting you. So what are you really supposed to do? Do you change it all and invite potential risk or pressure by bringing on a player like Pepe and maybe losing some of your defensive shape? You see the energy is flagging in your squad. You might need to take a couple more guys off, but you've only got 2 subs. I'm reiterating a lot of things now, but so I just thought
Saka's already limping.
Saka's limping. Ozil is, you know you're only going to play him for an hour. So Paul, he had very few choices. And the game turns really on the substitution that we talked about from Chelsea, but it also turns on 2 crucial refereeing decisions. Obviously, there's the decision not to send off Jorginho, who, I don't know how he stays on the pitch. Prior to that, there is the Guendouzi tug at the edge of the box. It could have potentially been a penalty and potentially a second yellow card. I am minded to say that if we are going to be outraged that Jorginho stayed on the pitch, which is fair, we may have to ask ourselves why Guendouzi was able to stay on the pitch and why they didn't potentially get a penalty. So while I think the refereeing was poor and they got away with a lot of tactical fouling that impacted the game, on the balance of the 2 big calls, I'm more inclined to see it as balanced. I'm guessing you maybe don't agree with me. Do you want to give your quick take on those 2 incidents and whether we got the worst of it there?
Yeah, I don't think it was balanced. I mean, it's a question of degree. And the Guendouzi thing was so light, and it was on a guy who wasn't on the ball. It was on Jorginho, in fact, I think, again, who had already released the ball. So the referees kind of let him play go.
It was on Abraham, Paul.
Abraham, okay. Conversely, there's no ambiguity that the Guendouzi, the yellow that should have been for Jorginho against Guendouzi was a clear and outright yellow.
I mean, he gave a yellow for that to who got a yellow for that exact thing? Torreira got a yellow for the same thing for us, yeah.
Yep. What's more, Jorginho had just smacked Lacazette in the face with his elbow, and you can say, oh, well, maybe it wasn't an elbow, maybe it was just an outstretched arm. But those are pretty close to back-to-back. At that stage, you've used up any legitimate credit at that point, and it was a pattern of stopping us on the counter. And yes, it's a question of degree, but I mean, all the commentary that you hear from people who are not necessarily fans of Arsenal going down easily on free kicks were absolutely puzzled and and stuck with that line of why is Jorginho even on the pitch, or should Jorginho have been there? I mean, these aren't friends of Arsenal.
I'll stop you for a second and mention too, there was a situation, I don't remember exactly who fouls him, but Lacazette gets fouled and dragged down and stays on his feet. It was right on the edge of the box. It would certainly have been a yellow card, but decides to stay on his feet and works hard and winds up losing the ball on his own. Would have been a free kick on the edge of the box and a yellow card there as well. That it might have been Rudiger who could have potentially been sent off later. So, I mean, there were incidents like that, Paul, definitely.
The fouls were egregious. They're the ones where the referee can't ignore them. And the fact that he yellow cards Lacazette for the Jorginho foul, I mean, it's just, the optics are bad. And, you know, to me, this game started to get away from them. And it was clearly a systemized level of fouling from them. That they were playing games with the referee and they were using it. I mean, fair play to them, I guess. That's how the game goes these days. But in the balance of fairness and where the game's at, it gives an unfair read on how well we're doing in a game when every time what we'd done in terms of maintaining shape or defensively being poised to pounce were pulled down. Because you then say, well, you know, what did we produce? Well, you know, the referee's snuffing it out on you. So, yeah, I think the other thing is you see, like I was listening to Neville's commentary on their first goal when Leno comes out, and the groan he lets out from it is not about the goalkeeping mistake. It's the travesty of the reversal of fortunes, because as you'd said, we were our game plan was playing out. Just before that, you see, having just watched it all, you see, and knowing what's coming, you see Frank Lampard walking up and down the sideline, frustrated to fuck, trying to work out how he's played his cards, and it's just not happening. And you can just see the way it is. And now, you know, in hindsight, it all seems like it was always going to turn out this way. It absolutely wasn't. And yeah, we lost our legs after that. But then, as you alluded to, this is a team we're kind of like a beaten dog. Sorry for that expression. But we're just kind of used to what happens after that. But up till that point, I don't know. I think we held our own. And one word on Guendouzi, I would say he's very much not in his top form, but go and look at his stats from, say, 30 minutes to 81 minutes. His work rate, he may not have been brilliant on the ball. He was better in the
period where we were worse.
Yeah. You look at all of the stats you can for tackles, blocks, clearances. Nobody works harder. Nobody does more than him. And there's a reason why he's involved in all those situations we're talking about here. So, yeah, I don't think he's in great form. But I think he was actually pretty significant, and the interesting balance was he let Torreira shine, whose passing was excellent under all of that pressure. It was around 90%, and he's playing through all that period, keeping it really clean. I do think he got a bit tired though, and he started rolling when challenged. And you know, when you're a little tired, you're going down a little too easy, and we even saw that on the Jorginho goal. So yeah, they were all starting to fade.
And I mean, look, the narrative of a game is often developed by the last thing you see. And the last thing you see in this game is Arsenal getting absolutely hammered, because after the Leno error, we really lost the game. I mean, we lost control, we lost composure, we lost structure. We chased a win that wasn't there with tired legs and psychologically defeated players, and it didn't work, and we lost. And I think if you just want to draw the narrative of the game from the last, 7, 8, 10 minutes of the game after the Leno howler, then yeah, we were soundly beaten. But that's not the game that was happening up until their equalizer. It was a game that we had at least a modicum of defensive control over. And if you want to say, oh well, how is this different from an Emery game where we're just sitting on a lead and getting battered? Well, we weren't getting battered. Watford had 31 shots against us when we were sitting on a lead. Up until the hour mark, Chelsea had 4. Up until their equalizer, we were out XGing them, for whatever value you want to place on that. Yes, they had more of the ball. They did not have the clear chances to win the game, and we were not under the caution the way that we were, in games like that Watford game under Emery, where we just battened down the hatches and got beat up. We were controlling the game with the defensive shape, which was nice to see. And so, Tim, I'll ask you, People want to say Arteta got out coached, Arteta got out tacticked. What the hell is the guy supposed to do? I mean, I'm not just going to sit here and say he got everything right. Maybe there were moves he could have made earlier. But with one enforced substitution that he had to make early, a bench that's fairly inexperienced, no real experienced midfielders to call on, a couple of different players clearly showing some fitness issues. I mean, even with the benefit of hindsight, you're Arteta. What moves would have fixed what inevitably happened, especially under the circumstance that we've called out repeatedly now, which is that while we were not in control of the ball, we were certainly not out of control of the game.
And while you're winning.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, what it would have been really nice to bring Guendouzi on as a sub in this game, in my opinion, or maybe even someone like Granit Xhaka, because what we really needed probably was even a player like Arteta himself.
Get our foot on the ball.
Yeah, exactly. That was exactly what we needed at that point. One thing I will say, I will kind of push back on though, I think he should have taken Lacazette off, and that's not just a hindsight thing. That's something I said at the time.
Instead of Nelson.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
I thought Lacazette, it was in front of the bench actually, made it really clear he had nothing left, and he actually looked at the bench as well. He went to close something down, and it wasn't like a muscle pull or cramp or anything like that, but he looked at the bench and it was, I'm done, I'm finished, like I've got nothing left. And straight away, the guys I sit with were like, he's got to come off, and he's got to come off now. And it created a problem for us for a few minutes because we just couldn't get out. And we couldn't get out via midfield anyway because Chelsea had created numerical superiority in there. But we lost the ability to go long, the option to go long, because Lacazette couldn't run anymore. And actually straight away, it's Lacazette that gives away the free kick that leads to the equaliser. And it's because he's tired. He's so tired. He shuffles back. And, he commits a lazy, very, very tired foul. And I think the warning sign was there that was going to happen. Well, maybe not so much of that, but we completely lost our exit. And straight away, like me and my mates, like, right, this has got to be, probably Pepe, stick Aubameyang up front. We're playing on the break now. Let's kind of lean into that. And
So can I ask you a question, though? Because I've just put you in the manager's chair, and you're making this decision now, and I agree with you. Lacazette looked done. I was saying on Twitter I wanted to see Pepe come in and either play center forward or give Aubameyang the chance to run in behind, because Chelsea were pushing up to try to get back in the game. But here's the question, right? Nelson, I don't know, in the Bournemouth game, Nelson was out on his feet after 70 minutes.
Yeah.
You've got two subs left, okay? So if you decide to use Pepe for Lacazette, and then what do? You're either leaving Ozil on the whole game or you're leaving Nelson on the whole game. And I just wonder, Tim, and I'll turn this back to you, but if you leave a tired center forward on, at least defensively you figure you can ride that out. But if you leave a completely exhausted winger on, the degree to which that exposes you defensively and prevents you from being able to press and harry and get into position is more of a worry. So do you think the issue there is he's like, I've got to get Ozil and Nelson off because I can keep my defensive structure if I do that. Whereas if I take Lacazette off and it's more like for like, I don't add the running power in the areas where I need it.
No, I don't agree with that. Okay. Because I think the difference is the difference is with keeping Nelson on is at that point, look, you're right. There are a lot of players that were knackered. Saka was out on his feet, and we saw that for the second goal. Ozil, wasn't quite at the intensity anymore. Like there were some tired players out there. I think the thing is between Lacazette and Nelson is at the very least Nelson can just sit on top of his fullback, and you can ask him to just kind of try and drive the ball forward and get you up the line and win throw-ins and things like that, which Nelson I think was still doing at that point. Don't get me wrong, he was pretty much done as well. But I think at the very least, you sit him 10 yards in front of Maitland-Niles and you create a bit of a barrier there. Whereas with Lacazette, I think it's a bigger problem with your centre forward, because then you lose your exit, and it absolutely guarantees that the ball's coming back at you as soon as you clear it. And I think that was a bigger problem in the central space. Don't get me wrong, I'm not entirely convinced that Aubameyang would have completely solved that, because we know he doesn't hold the ball up, but at least you get to hit the channels at the very least, and we just couldn't do that with Lacazette. For me, it was almost like, you know, when a player's injured and you run out of subs and they just start hobbling around to try and create an obstacle. That's kind of the state that Lacazette was in, and I think it's better if you're on the touchline and you're in a slightly smaller space, rather than like carrying the whole of the centre of the pitch and running like the width of the centre circle. And I think there's actually a lot more running for a striker to do, certainly over kind of and turning direction and taking hits from centre backs. Whereas I think if you've got a tired winger, at least they can just kind of do the odd burst up the line, try and whack the ball against someone and get a throw in. Like, it's still not ideal, but I think it's better than your centre forward being completely absent.
Yeah, and I do think at a time when they were really pushing us back and controlling the ball, having Aubameyang playing mostly in his defensive third while he was doing it, you know, with intensity and desire, you'd love to have his running in behind a pushed up. At the time when they were pushing up to try to get back in the game, we had no one who could really run in behind. Nelson was pretty much done. Lacazette can't do it at the best of times, but certainly couldn't do it in the second half. And Aubameyang was in his defensive third. So, you know, you give them permission to just start pushing up that extra 5 yards, that extra 10 yards, and pinning you back. So I do agree with you. I think that we lost our exit, and we lost our ability to make them think twice about how hard they were going to push to get a goal. You know, it is unfortunate too, right? Because every choice that Arteta had to make comes with trade-offs, right? I mean, if you take Ozil off for Willock, you get running power, but you lose the ability to maybe create that one moment of brilliance or possess the ball. When you bring Pepe on, maybe you lose a little of the defensive intensity. So there's a lot of choices, and none of them are perfect. Clive, how do you think Arteta did managing the sort of end game there, using those last two little subs he had? And do you have the kind of sympathy for him that I'm expressing, or do you think he just maybe got it wrong?
I have some sympathy. I think I would have liked to see Pepe come on in a central position. I think Aubameyang, I'd have kept him out left because that was a danger point for them. I just don't trust Pepe in wide areas at the moment. But if you play him centrally, what he does is he attracts people. And I think he makes people respect him. So it's almost like it's a different game with him. You can say to him, I want you to just work between the centre-backs, and when you get the ball, make them nervous, to cut the turn, shake and bake and see what we can do. I totally agree with you about Lacazette. I saw the exact moment. He was bent over, hands on knees, and I thought, he's got to go. That's exactly what I thought. And then he gives the foul away, and Jorginho got under his skin. He got him booked, and it was all about stress, right? So I don't think Arteta could do much more. But what I will say is that, you know, obviously we all feel this guy is the guy, Arteta. We all feel he's made of the right stuff. We're looking at the football and we're seeing something which is the beginning of something new, something that was even different to Arsene Wenger used to do. And we're all buzzing about that because it's the modern game, right? So, but what this really highlights for me is what I've been saying for quite a while. I don't think our players are that great. You know, I don't think they were great for Emery. I don't think they're great for Freddie. I just don't think they're that great, which highlights to me the type of players we recruit. We are not recruiting the right type of athletes, stroke footballers to play the game that is prevalent at the top end of the Premier League. We have not won. We've only won 5 Premier League games. It's just incredible where we are. And we debate these names. We talk about how Ozil couldn't last. He couldn't last. He's taking home 18 million quid a year. He should last. When you're not playing Lacazette, when you're sitting on the bench and you're moaning and groaning, I hope you're doing extra running, because it doesn't look like it to me. It doesn't look like it, because when we needed you, you weren't there. You weren't fit enough. These details really, really count. It's the younger players that are going beyond their abilities, beyond their experience. They shouldn't be doing what they're doing. They haven't had the loan, so they're in there and they're doing it. They're really producing it. And I feel very strongly that we need to wake up as a club and start recruiting the right type of players so we can play this game, and stop deluding ourselves that we have the right type of player, because in the end, we're now debating kilometres, we're debating fitness. We're debating fitness in December. That means we haven't been putting it in, we haven't been working hard enough, we've been insular, we've been unprofessional, we haven't done our extras. We're not doing things like Mason Mount has done and hired his own chef and hired his own personal trainer, and he's out there doing it. That's what Smith Rowe needs to do, because he's just as talented. He needs to work harder to get to the levels that those young Chelsea players are at, because they ran us off our feet. That's the truth. They were fitter than us, stronger than us, and we need to do more. We need to be demanded more of, and this is why I'm so excited about this manager. And I hope the club can see this and realise that the players that we have are not the right players, and this coach is brilliant, but he's only as good as the tools that are in front of him. And I'm not saying that he's a bad workman, because he's not. You know, he's got experience around substitutions. I'm sure he'll get some wrong, because we all do. But I'm telling you, he needs better, fitter, faster, more athletic players that are secure on the ball and that don't do silly things because they're physically underpowered and dropping away from the game because they can't manage. They can't manage the last 25 minutes of a game. This is consistent now for a couple of years. We throw away halves of football. Why do you think that is? Because we don't have the right type of player in our squad. And so that's why I've always been saying about blowing this lot up. I don't love them. I don't think they're good enough. And I think no matter what this guy can do, and I hope he gets supported, there's a ceiling to this. I really believe that there's a ceiling to where this is, because in the end, you can only go as far as your body takes you, and that's becoming more and more prevalent. I hope they'll get fitter. I hope some of them will grow, but some of them are going to break, and they're the ones that need to go.
Yeah, look, I think the fitness issue is now very, very clearly in focus, and maybe we'll just finish with that as we get ready to say goodbye. But before we do, Paul, I just want to touch on their winner. Huge gut punch. And for me, having gotten to the point where I'm not sure I cared about Arsenal, but I was losing the ability to feel devastated. You know, I would get angry, I'd get frustrated, but I wasn't feeling that emotional sadness, that devastation. This was devastating. I have to admit, before the Leno Howler, I was counting points and letting dreams of top four float around my head. Now it's dreams of relegation, which I'm kidding. I don't see that happening, although you'd certainly have to say if we don't start winning football games, it could. But for their winner, I have some sympathy for Mustafi, because I don't think anybody wanted him to play. He certainly would not have been playing were it not for the injury. And he did really, really well with aerial clearances. I mean, he was great with the ball in the air, and that is something that he's probably underrated for, because let's face it, not many of us have a very high opinion of him. But the fact is, we know who this player is. He's not a good defender. He's not a guy who has a future at Arsenal. He's been a bit of a disaster since he arrived, and he cannot defend in space. Now, whatever you want to say about Saka being totally unable to run, it didn't help. I thought this was just typical Mustafi defending in space. You watch him running backwards. He's twirling around. He's doing ballet moves, spinning, twisting, turning. I don't know what he's doing. He doesn't cut it out at the first opportunity. He doesn't get touch tight at the second opportunity. He gets turned onto the stronger foot. You cannot give the striker the turn onto a stronger foot. He does that, and it's a goal. Ultimately, it's a team pushing up to try to win a game and losing it, which, fair enough. But to me, if Mustafi's not on the pitch, I think at a minimum we probably get a point from that. How do you feel about that goal in particular? And is it just a case of, when you have bad defenders, sometimes they defend badly?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you came to me on Mustafi, because you know how he conflicts me. Somehow I feel something for him. The tragedy is he did the right thing on two occasions just before this, the kind of pushing up on Abraham in midfield into their half, maybe taking a foul he did once, or just manhandling him. And that's where it all goes to hell in a handbasket here. And I can understand it a little bit why it does this time rather than the other two times. The ball kind of is dropping even deeper. Abrahams goes deeper to get it, and Mustafi hesitates about how far upfield he's going to be pulled out of line if he gets turned or whatever, and that's where it all goes wrong for him. And I have some sympathy for his twinkle toes, ballerina-esque twisting and turning as he's going backwards. There's not a lack of not wanting to recover the situation or do the right thing, and then He leaves. He's not touch tight to Abraham. He gives him the strong foot, as you said, so that he turns onto the right foot, and then he does a ballerina's scissors in his efforts to close it all down. And you're just like, man, you almost had a really good game, but the person who got Mustafi'd was you. And unfortunately, it brings all of us with us. And yeah, he's one of those players. He's just not good enough. He's always got that mistake in him, even when he'd done, pretty much everything right to that point. Himself and Luis had actually done things right. But, Arteta, he's asked about the naivety of the goal. And I think it's interesting because he says, I think we had the structure really well. We had more numbers than the opponent and were completely in control. I think it's a 5-against-3 situation. It's the structure we need to control those sorts of situations. And, our centre-backs are pushed right up. And you can't then drop off, which is what we did. And both centre-backs have to drop off, and suddenly we have all that space.
It's ironic, too, right?
Transitions.
Mustafi used to be the guy that I was infuriated because he would dive in at the first opportunity and take himself totally out of the play. And now he's become the guy who will back off all the way into his net, given the opportunity. I don't know what switched, but that's not working either.
Yeah, but the heartening thing on it is you can... After Arteta said that, I went back and had a look at it. And yeah, you can see what we were supposed to be doing on it. We were almost there. He did it right twice in a row that half. The third time he drops off. And, it's the narrative. There's the old Arsenal coming through. This thing's going to take a little time. But we nearly snuffed out that transition correctly.
Yeah. And at some point, look, guys, I watched... Virgil van Dijk handle a one-on-one situation with Adama Traore, arguably the hardest thing to do in football right now, with pace, power, and composure in the tackle, and it was just a thing of beauty. At some point, your defenders have to do good defending. We want to put everything down to tactics and positioning, and that is fun to do, but the players have to be good enough. And to your point, Clive, if they're not good enough, that's just not going to work. I have some concerns with some of these players. We're playing a lot of young players, and most of them are doing their best job to be competitive in difficult situations. Joe Willock, for example, is a guy who right now I'm not totally sure that that's someone who's ready to be thrown in at this level of the deep end, but he's having to play. And I think in the last couple of games we've looked weakest when he's been on the pitch, and that's not an indictment of him, but I think some of these guys just aren't going to be ready at this level.
Can I say quickly on Elliot? I know we won't have the time to develop this, but I would ask people to go and have a look at
on
Willock when he comes on. In general, I agree with you. I've been very disappointed with Willock. But in this, he did everything he was supposed to do.
Well,
he nearly
scored.
Right? Yeah. Well,
I don't mean should have. I mean, could have scored. Had a good chance to score.
But a whisker.
He
harries, he rushes. Yeah. So I'm not saying he's in great form.
Okay.
But I actually think if you look what he did when he came on, he actually fulfilled the mission. And, he does a lot of good small things, kind of like Guendouzi does between 30 and 80 minutes. They don't light it up with the ball, but they do a lot of what you'd want them to do in that period.
Look, the thing that happened in this game, to just sort of summarize it, is Clive said it well. We are a small space team, and for a big chunk of the game, we were able to play in small spaces. And towards the end of the game, we were playing in large spaces. And just like under Emery, that's when we get easily exposed. And that's exactly what happened. Clive, if you want to chime in real quick, you can. Otherwise, I want to go over to Tim to look ahead and sort of wrap up here.
Just quickly, Arteta recognised it was a big space game. Willock is a big space runner. I think we need to start playing him as an 8, not as a 10. That's one thing. And then once he can see the game a bit more in front, I think he can arrive because he can travel. Don't leave him up there. I don't think he's experienced enough to be just behind the striker. I just don't think he is. But travelling, he could be something decent. So start him deeper. And on the goal, Elliot, just quickly. Team, that drill they're doing before the game, the back four drill.
Yep.
What that drill is all about is about getting on the piston. Yeah, one player goes forward. And what they're really trying to engender in the group is movement as a unit, but also they're trying to get people to communicate. Right? So that's a communication drill. On that goal, one player, 2 men. That's exactly the scenario they're doing that drill for. And they didn't communicate. They became 2 separate entities, and they both just stood there. All Luis had to say was, go through, press him, smash him. He could see we had time. We could see we had runners coming back. We had to smash it at source. We didn't communicate. We didn't go and get it. And that's what happened. We didn't engage. Well, the first time we didn't engage, it looked like Emery's Arsenal, didn't it? Running back towards the North Bank.
Yeah, not
Can I
great.
can I have a little nibble on that goal? Because I think actually where I was in the stadium, I think I had a better angle on this than the camera did. You can see, you're right to cite that drill, Clive, because the second that ball breaks to Abraham, I watched Luiz, and Luiz just starts squeezing up a little bit because he thinks that Mustafi is going to go into the back of him, like you say. So Luiz he's already anticipating, he's going, right, okay, those two are going to have a duel, and if the ball squirts free, I'm in there and I'm taking it. Yeah. And then the thing that really, really caught my eye, because this was almost exactly in line with where I sit, was that Luiz just starts easing forward, like total automaton, experienced defender, thinking, yep, I know how this is going to go. And then Mustafi stops, and you see Luiz stop, and he goes, what the you just see on his face and in his body, you see that, what the fuck is this guy doing? Like, this is not what we've practiced. This is not what we've drilled. And unfortunately, that is Mustafi all fucking over. He bailed on the game plan. That is, I can guarantee you, that is not. They will have coached that situation dozens of times, even in the week that Arteta has been there. They do it, like Clive said, they do that drill before the game. And I appreciate that Mustafi didn't start, but he's on the training ground. He understands that that's the ask, but he bails on it and he does his own thing. And that is just something we see from him time and time and time again. And, you talked about, Elliot, is it because, sometimes he slides on his arse like he did at Bournemouth in the last minute? He let us down on that defensive action because he went sliding on his arse.
Thanks
and missed
to Paul for pulling that up in the last pod, by the way.
Yeah, and Bournemouth didn't punish it, but Chelsea did, because Chelsea are a better team. Mm-hmm. And he did it late on. He's done it in both games, completely bailed on what he's been coached, on what the unit has been coached to do. And it's not necessarily about that he loves sliding about. It's what I've said before. He wants the quickest exit from the situation. He wants the quickest way out of the situation to pass the responsibility on. And he's still doing it, even when the ball goes to Willian. We've still got guys back. All right, Saka's huffing and puffing because he's got cramp, but Mustafi and Luiz are still there. They're still actually in position, but Mustafi's still daydreaming. He's still not thinking, right, okay, they're not throwing goal yet. I'm where I need to be, more or less. How do I defend this situation? How do I get rid of this ball? He's not thinking about that. He's thinking, shit, when is this going to be over? And when can I just bail on this? And that, unfortunately, and if Arteta's looking at who's not buying in here, there's your answer. That guy is not buying in. He will not buy in. And it's not an act of rebellion on his part. It is just a mental... Exactly. He's not able to. It's a mental defect that he has, that he will bail on the game plan. He will bail on what's been coached because he'll panic and he'll look for a personal, private exit, and he'll look to hand the responsibility off. And to conclude this rant, he should under no circumstances be in the 18 anymore. No more chances. January window opens on Wednesday, and you just say to him, I'm sorry, I don't care how many injuries we've got back here. You are no longer involved. Go and find yourself another club. We told you in the summer, you've got every right because you're under contract to stay if you want. But this time, you're not sneaking back in. You're not playing Europa League. You're not playing Carabao Cup or early rounds of the FA Cup. You are done. Find yourself another club, because these are the kinds of players that have to go as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and look, I mean, there's a point at which you say, this is a defender who, if I play him, I will lose points because of it. How do you pick that guy? How do you use that guy? It's just that simple. The Palace game last season, I mean, he cost us top four with that. I mean, it's not the only... He
internalizes. It makes it about him. And you know what? You just got to go, mate.
Yeah.
Go.
And I mean, you can have a striker who doesn't score goals when he needs to, and it's bad. It's really bad, but there are other things he can do. You can't have a defender who just loses you games. You just can't. I mean, you could say missing the chance to score a goal is the same as letting in a goal. I don't think so. I don't see it that way. But Well, Tim, let me ask you this just real quick. We're going to start to look ahead to the United game, and since we've gone on long here, maybe just for a couple of minutes, but Arteta's got a real problem because the way he wants us to play requires a lot of positional discipline, energy, running, and not running in the sense of just running up and down the pitch, but just staying in position, keeping the distances close, pressing quickly when you lose the ball, that counter press. And you can see that the players don't really look up for it right now. And he's got a small squad, and it's the middle of the season, and there's fixture congestion. Can he reasonably implement this style with this squad in its current state, given that it looks like they're just not up for it for a full game?
I think we're just gonna have to take some pain, both physical, both literal and mental.
More pain? Is that possible?
Like probably not, and you're right, he doesn't have a lot of options for Wednesday against like a United team who are in good form and are great on the counter and all of that. But this is like, I view this game a little bit, and perhaps this is apt for this time of year when you haven't been for a run for a while, or you've not been to the gym for a while, and you go, and for 2 days afterwards you're going, oh my fucking God, I can't walk. But you know it's good, you know, it's like, okay, but that's my body telling me this is good, that if I keep doing this, I'll get there. And look, we're in a fairly unique position at the moment where the league season is officially a write-off now, because if we'd won that game, we'd have been in 5 points of fourth, and it's kind of still on, but now it's completely out the window. And so we're probably in a position where we can kind of afford, a few kind of, if we have to burn a few players and lose them to muscle injuries, we're probably just going to have to do that for the greater good in the long term. So I share your concern immediately about Wednesday. I think they look absolutely done for, and this is reason number 117 that Raul Sanllehi's job should be on the line, because he thought that this was a good time to make the managerial change rather than like the November international break or the October international break
or the summer.
We could have yeah, I understand why they didn't do it then, but this was a fucking terrible time to do it. This really was absolutely terrible, and hugely incompetent decision making. But it is what it is, and we've got to live with it. And we can rest players against Leeds, and we've got a lot of young players. We've got some players who have, like David Luiz. He came out the team for a little bit. We've done a fair bit of chopping and changing up to this period. Ozil hasn't played every game by any means. Torreira hasn't played every game by any means. Xhaka had, gave himself a nice little mid-season break by telling everyone to fuck off. So there are players there aren't many players who've played every single game. Like it's Aubameyang, effectively at this stage. So I think he can just grit his teeth and go like, look, one more time. This is another big game. Get that crowd behind you again. Get in front again, and see what you can do. And even if it's a draw, look, we're not really playing for anything, are we? So that's a kind of that's a bit of a stepping stone. But yes, in the short term, I agree. I worry about Wednesday for that reason, but I think it's a necessary evil.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I know it sounds like I'm giving him excuses, but this is the pitch to give Arteta the job. We want you to take over a team that basically can't win anymore. We want you to take it over during the absolute most busy period of the season where you will have no time to work with them and no time to get them rested and fit and prepared. And we want you to use a teenage forward at left back and a 22-year-old midfielder at right back and have no center backs. And in both of your first two games, we want you to lose one of them to injury, so you only have two subs. We want two of your first three games to be Chelsea and United. It goes on. And oh, by the way, half the squad that you have available anyway is kids. It's a really difficult situation for anyone to come into. And this is what he has to cope with. Now, this is why he paid the big bucks and why he gets the job, is because they trust that he can cope with it. And I have to admit, there's been enough good things in the first two games to feel good about it. But I do worry a little bit about the United game, because this is a team that just desperately needs something positive to happen. And we certainly don't look set up to do it. So, Clive, I'll throw it over to you with a quick question about the United game. Just for the sake of having fresh legs, he's got to start Pepe, right? If not now, when?
Yeah, I hope he does. I really hope he does. But like we've spoken about Mustafi, Pepe has to buy in. He can't be, we can't treat him any different to anybody else. He can't be jogging about. He can't be making insecure decisions in the last third and creating a transition game. We need him to buy in. We know he's got the talent.
When he's on the pitch, do you see him not buying in? Just sorry to cut across you, but like I hear that he has to buy in, and a lot of that is coming from rumors of like, well, there must be something on the training ground. And there's a lot of extrapolating and assuming and guessing and reading the tea leaves. When I see him on the pitch, I mean, okay, maybe he slows play down a little because he likes to take the extra dribble or the extra touch, but I don't see a guy who's not buying in. Do you?
Yeah, I've heard some rumors. I don't really want to repeat them because they come from a really good source. I don't want to.
That's encouraging.
Say, but
and to be fair, Arteta has hinted at it in terms of training, how he's applied himself and that kind of thing. So there's something there.
When I say buy-in, well, this is I'm going to allude to it now. When I say buy-in, you have to buy into the group. So it's not just how you're training; it's how you're behaving and what you're doing within the group, even post-training. That's as much as I'm going to say. And you need to connect to your teammates. That's all I'm saying. And that's just not on the pitch. That's off the pitch. We only see them in their fun day of work. There's an office.
Keep him talking, Elliot. He's nearly there.
There's an office at London Colney, which is their place of work. Really, Emirates is the fun day, and how you behave in that environment is what really, really, really makes you a player in the squad. And I think he's got work to do in that regard, and some of that he just needs to settle in. So that's fine. That's just we shouldn't really even really think about that too much. But in the end, we have a much weaker squad than we had last year, even though we got excited mostly about Pepe, really, and that hasn't worked out. And some of those 6.5 out of 10 players in Wobie and Mkhitaryan, and we sort of missed them on the bench now, didn't we? Coming on, giving us 6.5 out of 10, taking those few minutes away from. And we've replaced them really with Nelson and Saka, who are doing fantastic, and these minutes are going to hold them in good stead. But they are exceeding expectations, going beyond what we thought they could ever do, and it's very difficult to rely on. I think Mkhitaryan anyway. I'm not sure the goals they scored last year, but we're asking Nelson to score for us and work up and down the line. It's a lot. It really is a lot, and he's doing great. But that's why we're in the situation that we're in, and we're very reliant on some of those senior forwards. And I'm afraid the mentality of our senior forwards is very questionable. It's very questionable, and this puts us in a very dangerous situation because without the goals, then we are looking down, not looking up.
Well, I guess the real question now, guys, and I just want to get maybe like 30 seconds from each of you on this, and that's it, like legit 30 seconds, not like, and now we've hit the 2-hour mark. Paul, I've always sort of wondered, how does a mid-table team fan get through a football season? What is it that drives them other than cups? And I guess we're there now. So top four is gone. The season is a busted flush for domestically, the league season. I guess the excitement now is just seeing what Arteta does with this group and seeing if we make progress. How are you going to watch this league season now just as a fan? We haven't had to do this. I mean, in my lifetime as an Arsenal fan, I've never had to do this. Just grind out a season. I mean, I guess you could say in Arsenal's last season as coach, we kind of gave up on the league in February, but it's not January yet. So how are you going to approach the league season just from a viewing standpoint now?
Yeah, on a personal basis, I actually find it as fascinating seeing a group of people trying to dig themselves out of a hole. So I won't actually have any difficulty having interest in the process. Thank God the guy at the center of it is one of the few guys on the planet I'd be interested in trying to see solve the problem. So that in itself has its own fascination. The biggest difficulty for me is not all the things you've listed. It's the most painful aspect of it is the fan support part of it. I'm not beating up on anybody. It's just fans don't do well when they're losing or when the team isn't doing well. And we all know this ourselves. You very quickly get into the finger pointing. We don't do well with loss. We protect ourselves from defeat because defeat feels like a kind of death, and that brings out the strongest emotions in people. and it all gets ugly quickly. And so the good thing, we've tried hard in this podcast to talk about this game up to the 81-minute mark. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. On a personal basis, I'd have if there wasn't a rest of the world, if I just watched these games on TV and then shut off, I'd be fine with the rest of the season. You just know what's going on with the fans, and you're concerned that they're going to contribute to, when things are on a knife edge, from being able to keep the positives and it tilting towards the negative, and the baby goes with the bathwater. So that's going to be the most painful aspect. You need some results, even if it should all be about performance, and it should all be about having a process that's heading in the right direction. But bad results can capsize a boat.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And I think you have to ask, the danger here, Tim, is the balance in the squad is such that you have young players who might be willing to buy into a project without winning right away. But you got a lot of senior players that are already reaching for the exits. Aubameyang's camp talking about wanting to be gone in January. Xhaka probably is gone in January. Lacazette almost surely will not stay another season. Paul's on Twitter. Pause my pants. Thanks, pause.
Bye.
So just as a last thought here, I mean, both as a fan but also as players, do you worry that even with a bright young coach who looks like he maybe has good ideas and really could potentially lead us somewhere special in the long run, that the lack of a competitive season ahead of us in the league is going to make it difficult for him to keep the players committed and really get a fair chance to start his project out on the right foot?
Yeah, possibly. I kind of tend to think that probably needs to happen anyway. And, look, I'm not going to downplay like the size of the rebuild job, but at the same time, like, you look at this team and you think, well, this team and these players haven't really delivered anything anyway.
Yeah, so who cares?
It's not. It's not a long-term team. Most of these players have only been here a couple of years, and we're already turning them over. And actually, you kind of think, yeah, it was a short-term team. As you've said many times, it was a must-win now team. It hasn't won now. We always, like, in many respects, actually, I think this is slightly easier for Arteta because he's not walking into some of the situations Emery walked into with Ramsey and Ozil, and he's just signed Aubameyang and Lacazette. Like, a lot of these guys are getting older and getting closer to the end of contract, and I have a feeling that Arteta will want to work with certain types of player, and that he might be able to do that. I'm quite enthused by what he can do with the young players because I see them more as kind of unspoiled lumps of clay who can really buy in. I think it's easier for them to buy into what he's doing. So, I mean, I do worry a little bit because it's going to be difficult, but I don't think I ever had any illusions that it was going to be any different. And I'm really enthused by everything that Arteta has said and most of what he's done so far. I think we're in good hands. And that doesn't mean that everything's going to be fine and we're going to be league champions in 3 years, but I think we're in decent hands. It's a tough job, but I think we've got the right guy to do it. Yeah,
I am still on board with that as well. I think hitting the 90-minute mark and surpassing it when we've got pods every 2 days is probably going to handle it for us. So what we will do is remind you that there will be a Memories of the Decade pod with Tim Clark from Arse to Mouse for patrons on New Year's Eve. But if you are not joining us for that, which will make me sad, but if not, I totally understand, then I want to wish you a very, very happy and healthy new year and prosperity in the new year, both for you, for your family, and for your football club most of all. I wish that for you, Tim, who you can find on Twitter at Stilberto.
Thank you very much. And to you.
Yeah, thank you. I wish that to you, Clive, who you can find on Twitter at ClivePAFC.
Thank you very much. I'm back at you, son.
Thank you, sir. You will certainly be ending your year listening to Clive singing. That will be out in the not too distant future and certainly before the year ends. So look for that coming to a streaming platform near you. I certainly wish Paul a happy new year, even though he abandoned us early, just prior to the end of it. And from all of us, thank you for sharing the year with us. Thank you for sharing Arsenal together and the community that we forged on social media and Discord and all over the place. And just generally, we love you and hope you have a wonderful, happy, healthy, and safe new year and a prosperous 2020. And the same to Arsenal. And we will certainly get that kicked off by talking to you after Arsenal Arsenal 10, Manchester United 0.